Early in the 20th century, archaeologists discovered a quarry in the Prestley Hills where the bluestones used in Stonehenge were mined, approximately 130 miles from Stonehenge. Putting aside the practical issue of how the builders transported these large stones to the building site, let's focus instead on an even greater mystery. Heath had surveyed the distance from Stonehenge to an island due west in the Bristol Channel called Lundy. When Heath told Michel that the distance from the center of Stonehenge to a small hill called the Tump at the center of Lundy Island was precisely the memorable number 123.4 statute miles, Mitchell recognized the number from his research, and then all the pieces quickly fit together. A statute mile is equal to 5,280 English feet, and is still used to measure distances on roads in the United States. Michel and Heath drew a triangle connecting Stonehenge, Lundy, and the Prestley mine. Two such matching, interlocking triangles form a rectangle that has the same proportions as Stonehenge's station rectangle, and amazingly is exactly 2,500 times larger. This is the Greater Temple. What is more, the distances in the Lundy rectangle fit ancient Egyptian measure. Robin Heath's brother Richard pointed out in Sacred Number that 123.4 statute miles is precisely equal to 108 royal miles, the same unit that we've seen in Edinburgh and DC. This is no arbitrary distance, as 108 royal miles is 1/32 of the polar radius of the Earth. The architects of Stonehenge must have chosen the building site in relation to an origin point originally selected at the center of Lundy Island. It's absolutely sublime the way Stonehenge resonates with the whole region and with the planet. As above, so below. 108 is a number sacred to many of the world's religions. For example, there are 108 prayer beads in the Holy Rosary. The Rosary is a key devotional path in the Catholic veneration of Mary. The worshippers' fingers keep track of the number of Hail Mary prayers they recite by moving along one bead at a time. Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains all use japa mala prayer necklaces in much the same way as Catholics. Incredibly, japa malas are most commonly made with exactly 108 beads. These too are fingered as the devotee chants or repeats mantras. Whether the worshipper is conscious of it or not, the moon is ultimately behind what they are actually venerating in 108 recitations. As I already mentioned, the mean radius of the moon is 1,080 miles. The connection between goddesses and the moon is as old as humanity. Coincidentally, the element silver, which has always been associated with the moon, has an atomic weight of 108 grams per mole. In The Lost Science of Measuring the Earth, Michel and Heath show how the English foot was derived from the Earth's equatorial circumference. The distance around the equator equals 360,000 times 365.242, with incredible accuracy of 99.994% the current standard. This means the distance around the equator measured in English feet is the number of days in a year times the number of degrees in a circle times 1,000. Historians have lost track of when exactly the foot was invented in the mists of time, but you'll usually hear some tired anecdote about some old king's big foot. We can now confidently say that whoever defined the English foot knew the equatorial circumference of the Earth with an accuracy in the thousandths of 1%. We only achieved this level of precision in Earth measure in 1995, when the Global Positioning System, or GPS, became fully operational. Clearly, we are not the first to achieve this level of technological sophistication. The mile is also based on the dimensions of the Earth. There are 12 to the 5th divided by 10 miles in the meridian circumference of the Earth. 528 is the resonant key that both defines the statute mile because 5,280 feet are equal to 1 mile, and the central frequency of the ancient solfeggio, an ancient musical scale used in religious chanting. Metrology, the science of measurement, is one of the keys to decrypting the ancient mysteries. After all, the word geometry literally means earth measure, and virtually all ancient measurement systems were based upon the dimensions of the earth. As John Neal laid out in his groundbreaking book, All Done with Mirrors, which was subsequently expanded upon and popularized in books by John Michell and the Heath brothers, the English foot turns out to be the root of the ancient system, wherein units designed to measure different scales were interrelated by fractional relationships. The way the ancient system used simple fractions is analogous to how the metric system uses powers of 10 to interconnect units used at different scales, such as millimeter, centimeter, kilometer, etc. As if these discoveries weren't enough, John Michell and Robin Heath stumbled upon yet another amazing find. There is an island just north of Lundy called Caldy, where there is a very old priory church built over an ancient Druid menhir. This island is located at the 2 to 3 point, along the Presley-Lundy edge of the figure. Musicians will recognize this proportion as the fifth, the most fundamental interval in music. If you draw a line connecting Stonehenge with the precise 2 to 3 point, roughly coincident with Caldy, you get the following proportion. If the Lundy-Stonehenge line is 12, then the Caldy-Stonehenge line is the square root of 153. Believe it or not, we'll see this cryptic number 153 again in the Louvre Pyramid and also in the Bible. So what's up with the square root of 153? Simple. It equals 12.369, the number of full moons in a year. So the proportions of the simple diagram encode cycles of sun, earth, and moon. This is far too much to be explained away by chance. However, Michell and Heath don't offer a theory as to how Neolithic tribespeople knew the precise size of the earth, surveyed such long distances, or understood subtle mathematical and astronomical relationships, living in what we know for certain to be an utterly primitive physical culture. Logically, one must consider the possibility that someone other than Neolithic tribespeople built Stonehenge. Michell and Heath's work sadly hasn't been accepted by the scientists of our times, and is ridiculed as pseudoscience, because their research has exposed how little we really understand about the origins of civilization. I, for one, urge you to keep an open mind, and to weigh the evidence yourself using the scientific method. Academics today have little tolerance for theories that completely upset the apple cart if they wish to keep receiving funding. I don't have an unassailable theory either, but I will say that the builders of Stonehenge sure had some extraordinary architects directing their work. Fast forward 4 millennia from Stonehenge, and not far away Isaac Newton is hard at work in London on his theory of gravity. He's already invented calculus to cope with the mathematics, but now needs an accurate value for the size of the Earth so he can calculate its precise volume, and thus fix his gravitational constant. Few realize that Newton was much more than a scientist. Today's scientists downplay the fact that their greatest hero was also a practicing alchemist, an art many today would consider pseudoscience. For example, Newton was the first to quantify temperature in 1700 with a scale that was based on the freezing and boiling points of water. I find it particularly interesting that Newton chose to measure his scale from 0 to 33 degrees. Conspiracy buffs are also aware of Newton being identified in the Dossier's Secrets as one of the Grand Masters of the Priory of Sion, an offshoot of the Templars. Whatever his reasons, Newton believed that the Great Pyramid's metrology encrypted the true dimensions of the Earth. John Greaves, professor of astronomy at the University of Oxford, surveyed the Great Pyramid just before Isaac Newton was born. Newton meticulously studied Greaves' work and based his own dissertations on ancient metrology on it. In 1637, Greaves made the most accurate survey of the Great Pyramid ever undertaken up to that point in history. He was the first to make the unlikely conclusion that the foot was at the root of the pyramid's measurements. To commemorate his discovery, Greaves inscribed a line inside the king's chamber, measuring precisely 1 English foot, with the words, "To be observed by all nations." The unfinished pyramid, that is, without its absent pyramidion cap, measures exactly 480 English feet in height, which also happens to be precisely equal to 1/11th of a mile. The width comes in at exactly 756 feet. Herodotus, the father of history, explained that the Great Pyramid was originally capped by a small model pyramid called a pyramidion, which was sheathed in electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. Unfortunately, the valuable pyramidion is long gone. Richard Heath's metrology shows the Great Pyramid's pyramidion measured 1 1/11th feet in height. This metallic cap would reflect the sun's light and look a lot like the shining eye on top of the US dollar bill. The Great Pyramid is the sole surviving wonder of the ancient world. It remains the oldest, largest, and most accurate building ever built. It was the tallest structure in the world for 4 millennia. It is aligned within 0.1% of true north, and its 13-acre base supporting 2.3 million blocks of stone is horizontal and flat to within 15 millimeters. The mean opening in joints between exterior casing stones is less than 0.5 millimeter. The scale and accuracy are astounding. I believe that even with all the money in the world, we do not have the technical capability to replicate the Great Pyramid today. There is much to be said about the Great Pyramid's proportions. I've already mentioned how 7:11 was encoded in the Statue of Liberty. Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer used the half-triangle proportion of 14:11 in his esoteric masterpiece Melancholia I. Richard Heath has found the half-triangle also encodes 365 days to 20 moons, an interesting astronomical take on the mystery. Notice how pi and phi, two of the most important numbers in mathematics, are also implicated and interrelated in the pyramid proportions. John Charles Webb Jr. has made a profound discovery about the location of the Great Pyramid that is unfortunately widely ignored because of its utter implausibility. Using Google Earth, we can measure the exact latitude of the center of the Grand Gallery inside the pyramid. It is 29.9792458 degrees north. The speed of light in the vacuum is 299,792,458 meters per second. Incredibly, these are the same numbers. How can this be? This correlation is either pure coincidence or evidence of something very profound. The meter as unit of length and the practice of dividing time into seconds would have to be coordinated for the location of the Great Pyramid to encode the speed of light. Nothing may sound more improbable, but this is exactly the sort of numbers game that I think the ancients played. Consider the fact that 1 second is 1 Earth rotation divided into 86,400 parts, because 1 day is equal to 86,400 seconds. Recall from the Stonehenge and San Francisco episodes that the sun's diameter is 864,000 miles, and 864 is the number of the sun. Perhaps the second and the mile were skillfully designed to express this beautiful harmony with the sun. The kilometer was originally defined by assuming the Earth's meridian circumference equals 40,000 kilometers. In Paris Part 3, you'll learn more about something I call the Canon of 400. For a taste, consider that during a solar eclipse, the moon perfectly covers the sun disk. The only reason this occurs so precisely is because the moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, while at the same time the moon is 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun. In addition, the Earth turns 400 times faster than the moon. Perhaps saying the Earth has a meridian circumference of 40 million meters was no accident, as it's in the same number canon. I think the meter was secretly designed to resonate with the sun. In fact, today the meter is circularly defined in terms of the speed of light, which is itself measured in meters per second. Consider the possibility that the meter is an ancient unit that was merely reintroduced 300 years ago, during a time of great Hermetic obsession in France. With these facts in mind, it is easier to see how disparate units based on our planet's source of light truly encode the speed of light using the location of the Great Pyramid itself. Our history books somehow miss the fact that architects at the dawn of history knew the speed of light in the vacuum and the exact size of the Earth with pinpoint accuracy. Perhaps the Great Pyramid was made before the Egyptian culture began, by different architects entirely. In 1964, Alex Badawi and Victoria Trimble discovered that shafts in the King's Chamber within the Great Pyramid pointed directly at a belt star in the Orion constellation, and the pole star at the time the pyramid was built. In 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink got permission from the Egyptian authorities to send a robot up shafts in the Great Pyramid. He was able to accurately measure the exact shaft angles, and this data allowed Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert to run astronomical calculations showing precisely where the shafts in the King's and Queen's chambers are pointing to in the sky. In their 1995 book, The Orion Mystery, Bauval and Gilbert revealed that the shafts in the Queen's chamber point directly to the star Sirius in the south, and to the pole star at the time the pyramid was built in the north. I can understand the pole star connection, because recognizing that stars rotate around the celestial pole is the most fundamental observation in astronomy. But why do the other shafts point to Orion and Sirius? The book Talisman by Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval sheds light on this mystery. Orion and Sirius represented Osiris and his consort Isis to the ancient Egyptians. They are in a region of the sky called the Duat, the Egyptian netherworld, where souls journeyed and were judged after death. Hieroglyphs in the 3,400-year-old tomb of Thutmose III explain the benefits of copying the Duat upon the earth. Whoever shall make a copy of the Duat, and shall know it upon earth, it shall act as a magical protector for him, both in heaven and in earth, unfailingly, regularly, and eternally. So the Egyptians believed building copies of Orion and Sirius upon the earth acted as magical talismans, bringing the power of heaven down to earth. We've certainly seen a much more recent example of this in Washington, D.C. The Orion constellation is often depicted as a hunter with a sword between his legs. Dan S. Ward of Halexandria.org says, "No male wears a sword between his legs, and very few hunters carry a sword. Perhaps a more appropriate description of that which is hanging down below Orion's waist is that of a phallus. The area of Osiris's phallus contains the Orion Nebula, one of the most studied regions of space, because it is an incredibly generative area where stars are continually being formed. How appropriate. By the way, we are in the Orion spur of the Milky Way galaxy, and Sirius is the brightest star in the sky by a wide margin, because it is one of our nearest neighbors. We now have the astronomical knowledge to recognize we are actually quite close to the Duat. Bauval and Gilbert showed that the three pyramids of Giza actually have the same position and relative sizes as the belt stars of Orion. Dr. Gerhard Haney noticed that just as the belt stars of Orion point at Sirius, the pyramids point directly at Heliopolis, ancient center of Egyptian science, art, and religion, which was a single unified body of knowledge in ancient times. Pythagoras, Plato, and many other ancient philosophers journeyed to Heliopolis, were initiated there in the Egyptian mysteries, and spread them in the West. Today the only thing that's left of this entire city is a single obelisk, which happens to be the oldest standing obelisk in the world. Incidentally, this single obelisk is all that's left of the ancient Temple of the Phoenix, which was described by Herodotus. I can't help but recall phoenix imagery in the Security Council chamber of the United Nations. It's amazing how many connections there are between the symbolism of the elite and ancient Egypt. You've already heard about one Heliopolitan obelisk next to the Met in New York City, and its pair on the Victoria Embankment in London. Rome has the remainder of the Heliopolitan obelisks left in the world. Heliopolis was the cult center for the 9 great Egyptian gods, collectively called the Ennead. We'll learn more about the Ennead in San Francisco. In the first decade of the 20th century, G.I. Gurdjieff went on a mystical journey where he met with a number of remarkable men. At Mount Athos in Greece, he was supposedly entrusted with the key to decoding ancient Egyptian knowledge preserved by the Sufi Sarmong Brotherhood. The key he received is the Enneagram, and the means to decipher it. The Enneagram is the fundamental hieroglyph of a universal language. All knowledge can be included in the Enneagram, and with the help of the Enneagram, it can be interpreted. Gurdjieff's philosophy was popularized by his pupil Ouspensky, and through him the Enneagram found its way into modern psychology. The Enneagram of personality is a typology described by Riso and Hudson that's used in business, psychotherapy, arts, education, and for spiritual development. The Baha'i Faith correspondingly uses a 9-pointed star as its symbol. Baha'i scripture specifies that every house of worship must feature a 9-sided great room. There is even a Christian connection. In the 9th book of the New Testament, St. Paul wrote, "The fruit of the Holy Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." Here is the traditional depiction of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, shown with first letters in Latin. It's another 9-pointed star. With these things in mind, let's explore the sacred geometry of San Francisco. Believe it or not, San Francisco is steeped in Egyptian symbolism. The original Michael H. DeYoung Museum, that was built in 1894, had an Egyptian theme, complete with an under-pyramid entrance that anticipated the recent addition to the Louvre. The museum was unfortunately destroyed in the 1906 earthquake, and the DeYoung Museum is presently in its 3rd incarnation. However, the 2 sphinxes that flank the original museum's entrance are still there. The Transamerica Pyramid is a landmark worldwide and is the most famous building in the city. But the Transamerica Pyramid neither houses the headquarters of the Transamerica Corporation, nor is it really a pyramid. Does it remind you of an obelisk? It's clearly not a true obelisk because it's not carved out of a single piece of granite, and the elevator core protrudes out of the sides of the structure. But we can see beyond this modern necessity to perceive its symbolism. The height of the 1972 structure is commonly cited at 853 feet, but this figure doesn't include the glass pyramidion cap and its mast. Adding the additional 11 feet brings the total up to 864 feet, making this the tallest obelisk in the world, far exceeding the Washington Monument's 555 feet. And 864 is a very interesting number indeed. As you learned at Stonehenge, the sun's diameter happens to be 864,000 miles. In addition, there are exactly 86,400 seconds in a day. By making the Transamerica Pyramid 864 feet high, the architect was clearly making it a solar symbol. The glass pyramidion cap contains a brilliant light that shines forth on July 4th. In addition to it being U.S. Independence Day, July 4th is also aphelion, the day the Earth is farthest from the Sun in its yearly cycle. The Transamerica Pyramid occupies a privileged site in the streets of San Francisco. It marks the endpoint of Columbus Avenue, which cuts across the street grid at a 40-degree angle. It's funny, but I recognized the significance of this 40-degree angle immediately because I'd just been hired by an architect to make a 3D model of his 9-sided atrium. This incredible synchronicity is what allowed me to make the next discovery. When I overlaid a 9-sided figure on the streets of San Francisco, here is what I found. The Transamerica Pyramid fits at this vertex. Columbus Avenue runs along this edge. The grid of streets matches this edge's 40-degree turn, and most significantly, it appears that Treasure Island was designed to fit this figure. Treasure Island was completed in 1937 in time for the Golden Gate International Exposition. The U.S. Navy controversially seized Treasure Island from the city of San Francisco during World War II. The Navy built the unusual star-shaped barracks in the approximate location of the tower that had been torn down after the Expo in 1937. The barracks also happened to be exactly at the midpoint of this edge of the diagram. While I'm not certain what the barracks symbolize, their shape and position does seem significant. Masonic author Albert Churchward says the hieroglyph of the risen sun god Horus looks like this. Also, 6 triangles in hieroglyphs means land of the spirits. In any case, the Navy base was recently decommissioned, and Treasure Island is now open to the public. I went there to find the barracks abandoned, but the strange symbolism remains, at least for a little while longer. There is currently a plan in the works to build a large mixed-use development on Treasure Island. The plan, scheduled to be completed in 2022, calls for a 650-foot-tall sun tower to be constructed where the star-shaped barracks are today. Coincidentally, the single bus line that serves Treasure Island is Route 108. Again, in the Stonehenge segment, you learned why 108 symbolizes the moon. So in a few years, you'll be able to ride the moon bus to the Sun Tower. In the Great Pyramid segment, we studied the Ennead, or pantheon of the 9 ancient Egyptian gods worshipped at Heliopolis, the city of the sun. When we layer the Ennead over the 9-sided figure, we see the correlation between the solar Transamerica Pyramid and the phallic obelisk of Osiris. When I turned on the terrain layer in Google Earth, Telegraph Hill poked up through the Ennead layer, so I started researching Coit Tower. It was designed by Arthur Brown Jr. in 1933, after Brown designed 3 buildings in the Federal Triangle, which you'll remember figured prominently in the secret architecture of Washington, D.C. The octagonal top of Coit Tower fits within the octagram star, which you saw in Washington, D.C. Part 2, is a classic solar symbol. Do you think this is coincidental? There were 4 pairs of male and female gods in the oldest Egyptian creation myth, which predated the Ennead. The Ogdoad, as the 8 gods were known, was venerated in Hermopolis, the city of Hermes. Hermes was his Greek name, Mercury was his Roman one, while both names echo Thoth, source of the Egyptian wisdom. All of these names supposedly reference the same immortal figure who dispensed wisdom to humanity at different points in history. The subtle arcs along the sides of the structure suggest the interlocking circles of the Vesica Pisces, which represents the female genitals. Perhaps not surprisingly, and just like the Washington Monument, Coit Tower symbolizes the act of coitus, or the sacred union of Isis and Osiris. Hancock and Bivall have well documented in their book Talisman how Thoth's knowledge base was passed down through the Gnostics, Manichees, Bogomils, and Cathars. All were ruthlessly wiped out by the Catholic Church. Any remaining followers were then completely annihilated by the Inquisition. Thankfully, the popes weren't entirely successful in instituting a permanent Dark Age, because a century after the Inquisition, Cosimo de' Medici recovered the Corpus Hermetica, which was written in the 1st century in Alexandria. This older stream of Hermetic knowledge that escaped the burning of the Library of Alexandria actually fueled the Italian Renaissance, and then went underground in secret societies that persist to this day. The Golden Gate is neither golden, nor is it literally a gate. Instead, it's the red bridge built the same year as Treasure Island. Known throughout the world as an engineering marvel and symbol of San Francisco, it also represents the fulfillment of manifest destiny, the 19th century belief in the inexorable expansion of the United States from sea to shining sea. Here's a 19th century painting depicting the goddess Columbia leading settlers westward in an allegorical representation of manifest destiny. The Golden Gate is actually a concept from, you guessed it, ancient Egypt. Are you seeing the pattern here? They believed the Golden Gate was the threshold souls must pass after death on their way to the Duat. You might be interested they also spoke of a silver gate, guarded by Isis, the great mother of the sun. Souls passing through the silver gate on their journey from the divine source are incarnated upon the earth. I think Treasure Island represents the silver gate guarded by Isis. Its 7 sides certainly have her number. Perhaps the gift of incarnation itself is the treasure. The soul journeys westward like the American settler and passes over Alcatraz, one of the world's most famous prisons. This fits with the Cathar belief that the body is the prison of the soul. All the while angels, this is Angel Island, fly above in a higher dimension. Angel Island is a state park and has incomparable views of the bay. The adjacent peninsula is the town of Belvedere, one of the highest income places in the United States. There may be a few angel investors in Belvedere who take in the incredible scenery and its symbolism. After doing time upon the earth, the soul passes through the Golden Gate to meet its destiny in the Duat. Now we're way out there. Let's fly back to Giza and get back down to earth.